Hello and welcome to this OECD webinar with me, Duncan Crawford. Thank you so much for joining us. In a world which feels increasingly divided by politics, by media, by ideology, how can education help rebuild trust? Trust is an important component of education because by fostering trust, it helps build bonds between individuals, communities, and institutions. But how should teachers build trust? And in today's polarized world, how easy is it to do that? Well, in this webinar today, we're going to have a panel discuss exactly that. They're going to discuss what's going to happen, and we'll also discuss the findings from the latest OECD Education Spotlight report, which is called The Common Thread, Building Trust Through Education. It's released in 3 days' time. Mark it in your calendars. On the panel today, Nicole Fournier-Sylvester, a senior research advisor at the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence. Katrin Finkenauer, a professor of interdisciplinary social science in youth studies at Utrecht University. Lana Parr, the president of the European Students' Union, and also Jonathan James, an OECD analyst from the Centre for Educational Research and Innovation. Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us. Just to say, if you do want to get involved in this webinar, then please do send in your questions. You can use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom feeds. Please keep your questions relatively short and concise, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. Now, though, to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to the OECD's Jonathan James, who's going to give an exclusive sneak preview, really, of some of the main findings of the new Spotlight report. Over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. Sorry, just get my sound on. So as Duncan mentioned, we have our spotlight on trust launching on Monday, and those of you who, sorry. So I'm going to try stop sharing and start sharing again, and it's gone wrong there. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, you should be able to see my slides now.
Looks good, Jonathan.
All right, great. Okay, so the Spotlight is launching on Monday, and those of you who have signed up for the webinar will get a link in the follow-up email. But the Spotlight actually draws and takes a deeper dive into some of the trends that we highlight in our Trends Shaping Education 2025 publication, which was released in January this year. I'm going to start by talking about why we decided to talk about trust now. I mean, trust has always mattered for the health of individuals and the well-being of individuals, but also of societies, democracies, and economies. We argue that this is a particularly crucial moment to build trust. Over the past 5 years, democracies across the world have faced challenges that require people to pull together and have some kind of faith in their governments. And trust helps governments and societies handle problems like climate change, armed conflict, and economic uncertainty by increasing people's willingness to cooperate with one another, to follow rules, and sometimes to accept difficult trade-offs. At the same time as these external challenges, we can see that democracies are facing internal strains. And here we highlight trends like declining voter turnout, growing polarization, and the rise of mis and disinformation and other forms of false and misleading content. Let's take voter turnout as an example. So this graph shows the steady decline in voter turnout across world regions since the 1960s. And this actually mirrors a growing dissatisfaction with democracy that's reported in national surveys, but it might also reflect declining trust in the political system because people who trust their governments more are more likely to vote in national elections. This graph shows that across 31 European democracies, the combined vote share of far left and far right parties has increased from around 11% in the early 90s to almost 25% in 2022. And on one hand, the fact that people are voting for more extreme parties might be a sign of underlying polarization. So it might be a symptom. But the research tells us that it can also be a driver of polarization. So the influence of extreme parties in parliaments and in public debate can actually further deepen division and distrust. Political polarization can also lead to what we call affective polarization. And that is when people begin to strongly dislike or distrust people that they associate with the opposite political camp. The data from the OECD Trust Survey shows us that people in OECD countries are more likely to distrust than trust their government. And we can also see that trust is unevenly distributed. So people with tertiary education are more likely to show trust in their government than people with lower secondary education. Older people are more likely to trust than younger people. But the biggest trust gap of all, and that's something we try to address in our spotlight, is between people who feel they have a voice in what their government does and people who feel that they don't have a voice. And we talk about the role of education in building that sense of political agency. Addressing these trust gaps will be essential to strengthen democracy, to tackle some of the shared challenges that I've already spoken about, and to help people navigate change. So as a solution, our spotlight explores the role of education in building two kinds of trust. So interpersonal trust includes the trust we have in people we know, so that could be friends, family, colleagues, or classmates. But it also includes a broader belief that most people that we meet in society will be honest and be willing to cooperate with us. And that's really important for communities to find common ground, work towards shared goals, and respond to shared challenges. Institutional trust is the confidence that we have in institutions like governments, schools, the news media, or the legal system. I've already mentioned that people that trust their government are more likely to vote, but they're also more likely to volunteer in their communities, to pay taxes, or to support public spending. Based on the research, the spotlight highlights 3 ways that education can build the 2 types of trust I've just mentioned, so interpersonal and institutional trust. Firstly, education helps people acquire foundational skills, and foundational skills matter for trust. And that includes skills like literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking. Secondly, because schools or early learning centres are often the first public institution that young people come into regular contact with, they play a really formative role in shaping their expectations of how different institutions will behave. And that's why it's really important that they earn students' trust through competence, honesty, and reliability. And this is a finding that comes from some really interesting research that Katrin did, which I hope that she will talk to us a bit more about later. And finally, we highlight citizenship education as a way of teaching young people about democracy and giving them that sense of agency by letting them practice it. So looking at foundational skills specifically, we can see here that in the last round of the survey on adult skills, only 25% of adults with low numeracy proficiency in OECD countries showed high levels of interpersonal trust, compared to 51% of those with high levels of literacy. The challenge here is, and then sorry, another thing to mention is that adults with stronger skills were also more likely to volunteer in their communities and report that people like them have a say in politics. So literacy and numeracy are really important for trust, but also for that sense of political agency. The challenge, I think, is that proficiency in these literacy and numeracy and other core skills are declining or stagnating across most OECD countries. And that applies to the adult skills that we see in this data, but it also applies to the skills of 15-year-olds in PISA. And this means that while strengthening citizenship education and building trustworthy learning environments is important, these efforts need to go hand in hand with a continued fight to improve literacy and numeracy and other foundational skills across the life cycle. So the Spotlight takes a deep dive into civic education as a way of building trust in the political system and addressing some of the concerns about the health of democracy that I've just spoken about. Based on the research, we highlight two practices that have been shown to have a lasting impact on young people's trust in the political system. The first is an open classroom climate. You might say, what is this? We define it as a learning environment where students have opportunities to discuss social and political issues openly, and where they feel confident that their teachers and peers will respect their opinions. In practical terms, it means that students get to take part in debates and formal discussions on the issues that they care about, but that they also have a say in what and how they learn. I think the challenge that we identify is that growing polarisation can make it more difficult for teachers to have these conversations and to especially to address contested issues like gender, sexuality, immigration, and increasingly climate change. The Spotlight highlights Judy Pace's framework for teaching controversial issues as a way of helping teachers prepare for, but also manage difficult conversations in the classroom. Research also shows that students who take part in civic and political activities at school or university have higher levels of trust later in life. Now, school councils are probably the most common form of civic engagement activities that are offered to students, but it's rarer than to see them taking more direct decisions or direct roles in decision making. So we highlight a statistic from the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, where 78% of school students said that they voted for a class representative, but only 41% reported having taken decisions about how the school is run. Based on the evidence on student participation, we provide guidance on how to make it meaningful, inclusive, and effective. I'll end very quickly with what we say about false and misleading content and how to build resilience to it. One thing that's interesting for this conversation is that experts actually identify polarization as a key driver of why people believe misinformation and why they spread it. And that's because people are more likely to believe content that aligns with their existing views and to distrust information that challenges them. In polarized societies, people may even disagree about which sources are trustworthy in the first place. The Spotlight recommends a coordinated approach that involves actions for teachers, for students, and for the wider community. And I'll end there so that we can start our conversation.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan James. Just turning my video on. There we go. Thank you so much, Jonathan James there. Really interesting, actually, a lot of that. And a fairly damning picture, really, what you're showing there of fairly widespread distrust with political systems in many countries, just for a start. Professor Katrin Finkenauer from Utrecht University, why don't we get this power discussion going and start with you, because you've researched trust among children and people. And obviously it's clearly important for schools and universities to have the trust of their students, but how can they build trust in students so that does benefit wider society?
Perhaps I can start with a little bit of background on the study that we conducted, because we were interested in school dropout, particularly because it's one of the strongest predictors of lifelong success and prosperity and health and well-being. And what we did is, when you look at school dropout, it's easy to look at students and to think about what's wrong with the student. And because we had an interdisciplinary team, we were also looking what happens around the student. And we studied over 1,000 16-year-olds in vocational school and found something extremely powerful, namely that students who experienced financial stress at the beginning of our studies, the students who felt that money was really tight, were far more likely to drop out 9 months later. And these are the hard objective dropout numbers. And much to our surprise, we found that the explanation was not their mental health or their background. It was really the trust in institutions. So when money felt tight, students often lose trust in their school, their government, and the people meant to help them. And when trust disappears, dropout rates go up. So to us, this signaled we cannot ask ourselves what's wrong with the student, but we have to look at the schools and the systems and the institutions in which they learn. And in order to address this question and to really answer the question of young people, can I trust you? What we suggest is to really follow the philosopher Honora O'Neill, and that we need to do three things really well. We need to be competent, which means that we need to do our jobs exceptionally well, delivering quality teaching, providing safe spaces, ensuring early, targeted, and consistent support. We need to be honest, especially when it's hard. So we had to set clear rules, we have to admit mistakes, and we have to have the courage to say, I don't know, or I need help. And we need to be reliable, to keep our promises, be predictable, do what we say we will do, especially when it's difficult or hard. And what is even more important, we need to own up to our mistakes if we cannot do this. And I think that's something that we can do in everyday life.
Okay, Kat, if I can ask a follow-up then, because
Yeah.
if we're talking about how to build trust in students, you're saying there's a need for competence, honesty, for reliability. Are you suggesting that at the moment a lot of lecturers, for example, aren't competent, honest, or reliable?
I think there are always two parties in trust, the people who are trustworthy and the people who have to trust you. So I'm not necessarily saying that teachers or representatives of institutions like myself are not reliable, but what we have to better understand is that people who have been exposed to adversity, or you have this advice, avoid uncertainty if you cannot afford a bad outcome.
Okay.
So people who need to trust and rely on others, who have experienced adversity, who do not have resources, who cannot afford to lose, are going to scrutinize those whom they have to rely on much more than people with a lot of resources. And that's what the research shows.
Thank you so much. Lana Parr from the European Students' Union, if I can bring you in, please. You work with national student unions across Europe. In your view, to speak for other students, do students have faith, have trust in their institutions?
Hello, everyone. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And maybe just briefly to give a context. So I'm the president of European Students' Union, which is the umbrella organization of national unions of students, focusing on higher education students. So that's also the position from which I can give you the answer. And I would say that my answer is similar to Catherine's, where I cannot be very concrete because I would say it depends. But what we can see in this time of uncertainty is that trust for sure is being shaken, to say it like that. And maybe to comment a bit of what Catherine was also saying, I'm not saying that that means that higher education staff, professors, teachers are not aware or maybe willing to support students and to work on building trust. But for sure, what I would say is that we can see that with the trends and with the global situation, also the needs and the ways to build trust are changing. And first step in actually building trust is understanding what do students need. So first of all, I would highlight here the need for communication, because the times we're living in right now are also very hectic. Everything is changing from day to day, which affects people's mental health, physical health, economic situation of us students, but also our families, our parents, which puts additional burden on a lot of students. So I would say what we need the most right now is also openness to actually listen to students. Because as you mentioned with your research, I think this is also something that students could possibly point out in a situation if they were, I wouldn't say necessarily ask, but we have students from different backgrounds whose voices are oftentimes very difficult to come through. So to actually have these voices and to have people who are in the position that they need support and the most feeling of trust in the educational system as a system and support and trust into educational academic community. What we need to work on is also finding the ways to actually reach out to those students and to create the environment where they can openly and safely, I would say, communicate about their needs. Because financial difficulties, mental health burdens, and also more and more family responsibilities that young people are having, that's not something that you feel very welcome to discuss with your professors, for example. Those are not the topics that just pop up in the conversation. It's important to build the environment, and I would also say educate and show the support to staff members to recognize students who are in these kind of situations and to really ensure that there is the environment and the communication streamlines. How can these sort of issues be actually communicated? And of course, when it comes to solving the issues, it's often much deeper than just one-way solution or one solution that fits all. So that really, I would say, also requires a lot of dedication for the academic community as whole, both from students, but also from the staff members.
Thank you so much for your thoughts there, Lana. Let's bring in Nicole Fournier-Sylvester, and apologies, I did see your hand was raised. I'm coming to you now. Your reflections on what are those opening remarks?
Yeah, so I actually just want to build on them. I think I completely agree with what they're saying. And I think one thing we need to do is also zoom out and have these larger conversations and ask ourselves, are institutions meeting academic needs and emotional needs? And we know they're not, because there's a global mental health crisis for youth. So why is that? And how are we contributing to or helping address that issue? Do students feel heard? Do they feel valued? As both Katrin and Lana talked about, are they included in decision-making processes? And can we as educators, researchers, and policymakers clearly justify the curriculum that they are being served, how it's taught, how it's chosen, who it represents, and how it's evaluated? Are we equipping youth to navigate today's world marked with uncertainty and technological challenges, or are we helping them navigate yesterday's world? Are we preparing them for the future? Do they feel prepared for their future? Do they feel inspired despite the fact that we're living in uncertainty and we can't really predict the job market that they're going to? So I think first we need to ask those larger questions, because I would argue that our education system is not designed in that way, in the way that we assess students, in the way that we talked about the importance of making mistakes. What in our curriculum encourages young people to make mistakes? How do we value growth over right and wrong answers? We know that by the age of 5, most children become afraid of making mistakes and become self-conscious in front of the classroom and turn down their levels of creativity for fear of being challenged or excluded from their peers, by their peers. So I think, I agree with what everyone is saying. And I also think there's like some real fundamental questions around how and why education systems were built that we also need to be talking about. If we want to build that trust with youth, we need to earn it by reflecting their needs within.
Thank you for that. Let's bring back in the OECD's Jonathan James, because there's a question here, Jonathan, from Anika Alvarez, who asks, do you think that apathy, disengagement, and disinterest from younger generations is being impacted by this? I think she's referring to a lack of trust. Do you think that apathy, disengagement, disinterest from younger generations is impacted by a lack of trust?
Right. So I guess I would kind of connect that answer to some of the things that have been said already, that we can't trust people unless they demonstrate responsiveness to our needs. It's a key element of trust. And one of the themes that we look at in the trend shaping education report, not so much in the spotlight, is the idea of kind of intergenerational fairness. So if young people are disengaging from politics, could this be because the political system isn't responsive to their needs and their concerns, right? So we've heard about that in an educational context. We can apply that to an educational context. Are schools, universities responsive to the needs of the young people they serve? If young people aren't voting, that maybe is a sign that they don't trust their government. And could the answer be for governments to be more responsive to their needs, particularly in aging societies where, a lot of OECD countries, the population is getting older, and there's an incentive there for governments to then look out for the needs of older people because there's more of them and they're more likely to vote. I would ask the question about, and I guess we explore this in our report, can governments be more responsive to the needs of younger generations and the problems that they are suffering?
Thank you for that, Jonathan. And look, it's been mentioned a few times now. We live in such a polarized world where people are taking sides and there seems to be no agreement a lot of the time with other people's points of view. If I can bring back in Nicole Fournier-Sylvester for a moment, in your view, how important is it to foster trust in children? How should teachers approach discussing topics which are polarizing?
Critically important. So I think critically important to build trust. And we know that dialogue and civic education are the most powerful approaches to be able to build that trust, including critical thinking, civic engagement, empathy, and tolerance, and all the things that we talk about in terms of addressing polarization. But before I talk about strategies, I want to talk about why these practices, despite the fact that they are clearly recognized as being powerful, are so rare in the classroom, because as someone who has trained teachers for years, I can tell you that it's not the motivation of the teacher, but it's actually the conditions that they work within. As I mentioned briefly, like the way that education systems are set up is for certainty, for right and wrong. And when we're setting up dialogue, what we're looking for is the ability to engage with nuance and complexity. We're asking young people to take risks, and we're asking teachers to switch roles. So they're going from like the experts to the dialogue facilitators. That is a completely different role and power dynamic that students have a very hard time adjusting to, as do teachers. There's a kind of cognitive dissonance that happens there. We're also saying there's more than one right answer. I remember when I was teaching controversial issues, my students would be like, they would be looking at me and they would always try and figure out what my position was, because their assumption would be that if they agreed with me, they would do better in the classroom, because that's how the classrooms are set up. They're not set up to believe that multiple realities can coexist, that we're looking at not the right answers, but rather the thinking processes behind the right answers. There's also fear of reprisals, especially now from other parents, from the administration, and these conversations take a lot of time. So they're powerful, but they take time. So these classrooms are not set up often for the conditions. They're also large classrooms often. There's a fear of emotional unpredictability. And like I said, teachers are not trained for them. That being said, it doesn't mean it can't happen, and some extraordinary teachers do it. I'm just very wary of asking teachers to embrace practices that are so contradictory to what they have to do in the rest of the curriculum, and still they are largely valued for the results that they produce. So standardized testing, right and wrong answers, single perspectives on history are very contradictory to the kind of environment that we have to create for dialogue. So just very briefly, though, the practices that work are establishing a shared why between teachers and students. Why are we engaging in this dialogue that is probably going to be uncomfortable, where people are probably going to make mistakes? What is the value of it? And making sure that students are on board. Having youth co-create the rules with the teachers. So what are going to be the consequences? Speaking of consequences, there shouldn't be zero tolerance policies, because that doesn't let you make mistakes. Instead, we take more of a restorative justice approach. Encourage and bring in diverse perspectives. And I would say, as much as possible, stay away from debate. When you debate, you're looking to win. You're listening to poke holes in somebody's argument. You're not trying to understand. So dialogue is about mutual understanding, engaging in curiosity. And those are more the capacities that we're trying to encourage. And then the last thing I would say, because I made this mistake so many times, is like try and end on a positive note, because often it's quite discouraging to tackle these significant issues. And I would also say tackle issues that you feel capable of. Don't start with the most controversial issue in your society. Maybe start with free school lunches and why would we have free school lunches or not, and build up to what you feel comfortable with.
Just to follow up very quickly on some of the points you made there, take an issue that is hotly debated. I know you don't want to debate them, but you want to have a dialogue about them. But for example, trans issues at the moment, is it fair to expect teachers to be aware of all the nuance and all the details of the different aspects to those kinds of discussions?
No. I would say it isn't fair, and the expectation, that shouldn't be the expectation. And I think that's why it's so challenging, as we have to reframe the role of the teacher when we talk about them as a facilitator. So students can bring in different information and share it, challenge it, as in go and get more information. You can bring in documentaries, you can bring in speakers, but the teacher should not be considered the authority figure on social issues where there are many competing perspectives. Their main role should be unpacking assumptions, asking follow-up questions, unpacking assumptions, and ensuring a brave space where students feel like they can speak up, identify the need for more information respectfully.
Thank you for that. A comment has come in from Manal Badana, who writes, "We must trust our students' abilities and not suppress their critical thinking, especially when we reach the stage of governmental elections where the new generation can be confident in its choices for leadership." I want to bring in Professor Katrin Finkenauer from Utrecht University again. Professor Finkenauer, is it always desirable to make students trust institutions and opinions to boost trustworthiness? Because in today's world, politicians lie, businesses lie, people lie. So is developing trust such a good thing? Isn't critical thinking and critical assessment of information more important?
Yes, it's very important. Thank you for the question. At the same time, when I was following this discussion, I think it's not only critical thinking, but it's also developing skills to detect whether somebody is trustworthy or not. And people who lie are not. I mean, they can abandon you in the same way. So I think that critical skills are important, but I think these critical skills should be conducive to detecting who is reliable and who is not reliable. I wanted to add something to Nicole's and Jonathan's answers, because, trusting the government, but the government are people too. So the representatives also have to adhere to and show that they are trustworthy. And what I was reminded of was this Chinese saying that says, "Teach me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will learn." And that's a bit, we cannot just practice knowledge and teach children something. We have to show them what it means to be trustworthy and to trust, which means taking risks also, to rely on others and be vulnerable. But we also have to involve them, and that's what Nicole and Lana also underlined, is we have to involve them in these processes to build. And I think the biggest challenge is to repair trust when it has been broken.
Thank you for that. More comments and questions coming in. Jose Weinstein saying it's important also to consider relational trust inside schools, not only interpersonal or institutional trust. And Dimitris Kuls has a question saying, since polarization breeds further division and mistrust, how can we break this vicious cycle? That's a big question. Lana Parr from the European Students' Union. I guess what's it like on university campuses at the moment? I mean, universities have always had people group themselves together into separate groups. I don't know if it's possible for you to assess, but does it feel to you like it is becoming more polarized?
Yes, for the beginning, I would like to just reflect briefly on the previous discussion. When it comes to trust, of course, I absolutely agree that we need to support critical thinking in students, which also means doubting certain decisions, doubting certain ways of doing stuff. But we need trust so we can trust further and develop trusting institutions, systems, etc. throughout our life. So I would say it's very important to have educational systems that build trust in a way that encourages us to think critically, to question things, to question existing procedures, decisions, etc. But that we have trust that that system is there for us to grow in it, not to cut students off as soon as some discrepancies occur. So unfortunately, I can also say that as a student throughout the years, I was sitting in the rooms where either me or my colleagues would doubt the decision or something said by the professor. That was not very welcome. Those students were usually remembered, and that would affect their final grade or the way that they were looked at the end of the academic year. And when it comes to the campuses nowadays, I think that we're facing very serious and very dangerous situation where we see a lot of polarization and where we see a lack of dialogue. And that's something that's from us very important to encourage on institutional level, because we see, of course, throughout the society, a lot of issues, a lot of topics where people, the society in general, is very polarized. But putting that in the context of university campuses, of schools, where we have young people arguing, but not having dialogues, not leading dialogues, and educational systems and higher education, I would say specifically, not encouraging and fostering these kind of discussions in a productive way. I think this is a very dangerous situation for us as a society, especially for the educational systems, because her education institutions need to be places where these discussions are being held, where you can have people who have opposite beliefs, who have opposite points of view, being able to talk and discuss about it. So from my point of view, I would also express the need from the institutions to engage in a way of fostering this kind of dialogues, of fostering places where these important questions can be discussed, and also teaching young people and leading by example on how to have difficult conversations, because we should not avoid difficult conversations, and that's not the right message to send to young people in general. We don't have to be neutral. Of course, it's important for all of us to have our own belief system, but what's most important is also to respect others and to try to understand where their beliefs and their positions are coming from. That's the only way we can have a functioning society.
Okay, thank you for that. Nicole Fornil Sylvester, your hand is raised.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly build on that. Obviously, we totally agree on the centrality of dialogue as the most effective way of building resilience to polarization. And I think that can start at such a young age. You can have a 3-year-old discuss the pros and cons of the clothes they're going to wear outside and engage in a dialogue about that. And I also think we have to talk about technology because it is, especially AI. Not because I necessarily think that's the cause, but it is an amplifier. So what we can teach our students is about the profit models behind algorithms, how they're designed to radicalize them. In my experience, the more you teach young people to like see how they're kind of being duped or used, the stronger their critical thinking becomes. And so I think they really need to understand that if they're not paying for something, they're being manipulated. They're being manipulated to be addicted, and they're being manipulated to essentially be radicalized. And that's a little bit the lens from the work that I come from. So we also need to build that into our education systems at the same time as we have these dialogues that we can build the skills of those dialogues like the second a student comes into the classroom.
Thank you for that. There's lots of questions and remarks coming in. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them. Apologies, but Manal Badana saying trust in the government is the most important factor for establishing honest and sound educational systems. OEC's Jonathan James, do you agree with that trust in the government is the most important factor for establishing honest and sound education systems?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to maybe refer very quickly to the OECD's Trust Survey, which is done by our colleagues in the Public Governance Directorate. One thing that is interesting is that the education system, they measure trust in different public institutions, for example, government, education system, the police, etc. The education system across OECD countries almost consistently comes out better than governments. So I'm not sure if the two are related, but I think one thing that we can note is that people seem to have more trust in adults seem to have more trust in the education system and their experiences maybe through their children than they do in national government. I guess trust in government is important for all policy areas because people want to know that their money is spent wisely. I mean, we've talked about the importance of being competent. So it's important for governments to show competence in the field of education in order for people to have trust in the education system.
Thank you for that. Let's bring back in Professor Katrin Finkenauer, because there's a question here from Valentina from Norway, who writes, how can we support educators who themselves feel distrust towards the system and disengage with democracy? Your thoughts on that?
Thank you for this question. And I think that's something that's right into my heart, because I think there is nothing more difficult than to repair trust. In the Netherlands, we have a saying, and I think there are some comparable in other countries where trust takes years to build and seconds to break. And I think what we have to realize is that it takes a lot of work, and the work is not very abstract. It's things like keeping deadlines, gossips. Somebody mentioned gossip in the classroom. I think Lana did. Gossip is really bad for trust. And so it's really the small things, I think, in everyday life to say, what can I do in order to listen to people actively? Put away your phone while listening to them. Do not look at WhatsApp while you're listening to another person. And these are little signs that people are trustworthy. I don't know what to do with teachers who distrust the system, because in some cases, systems are not fair, they are not transparent, rules are not consistent, and then we have a problem. So I think you need both for those teachers to find other teachers who can help them talk about what they lack in trust and perhaps think about it, but also some kind of school higher up management person who works with them to think about how do we need to adjust our structures in order to be fair, transparent, consistent, and honest. I don't know
Thank
whether
you.
that answers the question, but it's so close to my heart. So.
I think you had a very good attempt at it at the very least. No, thank you so much, Catherine, for that response. I do want to move the conversation on a little bit because we're running slightly low on time to discuss student participation and agency, and who better to turn to than Lana Parr from the European Students' Union. You did mention in your previous answer, Lana, you were talking about the importance of dialogue and discussions. Have you seen examples of dialogue or discussions which have brought sides together, successful discussions which have resulted in more understanding between groups who were potentially completely ideologically opposed?
Yeah, I would say that this is something that happens very often, but actually one story I wanted to share also with you is from my time when I was active at my university before joining ESU, because those are also the stories that are more, I would say, intimate and let's say you can see more direct impact for students. So that was due post-COVID time when we also in Croatia had a lot of earthquakes that damaged a lot of houses of our students, and also at the beginning of Russian invasion on Ukraine. So it was the time where you could feel that students were not okay. Nobody was okay. And we were fortunate enough to have mental health support services for students, which were free at the university. But what we noticed with talking with our colleagues, that the capacity were not enough. But the positive thing that we noticed there is because we spent years also working on destigmatizing mental health and the need for mental health. When we noticed that there is bigger interest from students than the capacity that the services can actually fulfill, that was the question we started raising at the level of the University Senate. And of course, it was important that we as students were involved in governance structures where we can actually raise those questions. So, of course, the first answer was unfortunately we don't have money to hire more people. But throughout our insisting and also mutual collaboration, what we managed to do is actually to come up with a model which equips students to hold student support services for their peers. So we saw that students at the beginning of their studies and at the end of their studies are the groups of students that are facing similar kinds of issues. So we work with students to train them to actually be able to support their peers with different workshops, and also to lower the capacity-wise the burden that the institution and psychologists actually had. And this is something that was possible to achieve with students being active in governance structure, with the places where we can, of course, for first give the information from the students, but also where we can be active enough to lobby and to voice our concerns and needs at a place where they can be solved. And I think that this also answers the question I think that Nicole had. Actually, it was actually maybe the consolation also from the beginning that people need to have a voice, that young people don't feel that they have a voice, which is absolutely true. But I believe that student representation and including them through educational system is really the right place to show people that they have a voice, and also to learn them how to use it, which is also very important. Because, of course, it's a great power, but it also comes with a lot of responsibility. And with implementing student voices in governance structures throughout the educational system, it's the perfect way to show students how democracy works and how you have the responsibility to use your voice. Because, for example, it can be something coming from, I don't know, the way you want to organize the prom, and we vote on that. And if you don't vote, you don't have a right to say, but then it leads you throughout the system to be able and confident enough to participate in actually bigger decisions that are being taken and to find a way and to learn how to affect them. And at the end of the day, it also gives you power of understanding how democracy works, and that your voice is not just one voice there that doesn't matter. All of our voices matter, and we really have to use them.
Thank you so much for that, Lana. And just to let you know that a gentleman named James Michael Walker in the chat has written, totally agree with you, Lana. Although he did write that about halfway through what you were saying. So I don't know if he agrees with everything, but certainly the start of what you were saying. Some agreement there. Chris Shaw also writing in a comment here saying there is growing evidence now that involving people in policy making, for example, in citizens' assemblies, improves people's trust in political institutions and the policies developed in an inclusive way. It's about having a voice, he writes, provided it is heard. Let's bring in Nicole Fournier-Sylvester on that point. How can we ensure student voices are heard, and how do we ensure they're more inclusive? So it's not just the loudest, most confident voices which get all the attention.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because that is an issue, right? It's often the most privileged voices, people who feel like they have a voice that should be heard because they've been raised to believe that their voice is important and matters, that like take up the most space in dialogue. So this is one of the places where technology can also help. So providing like anonymous opportunities for engagement or input, actively bringing in different perspectives into the classroom. And that's part of the role of the facilitator, is to bring in as many perspectives as possible. I totally agree that any time that you can bring youth into the conversation, they should be. I can give examples like it was my students who decided how and when the grading structure within the classroom worked. So what the deadlines were, whether they were allowed to resubmit assignments if they failed, that was established on a classroom by classroom basis, and that also responsibilizes them, and it builds trust in their relationships, and it gives them a sense of agency. But also, just to build on the idea of agency, that's very much also linked to purpose and having a sense of control over your life. So it means connecting students to real world impact, encouraging, highlighting like role models and what they can do outside of the classroom and the types of jobs that they might have, and supporting civic engagement outside of the classroom, like blurring those lines between the classroom and broader society so that they also feel meaning outside of society, and not outside of society, outside of schools. So like breaking down those barriers also give a strong sense of purpose and agency, which I think are very tied together.
Thank you for that. Jonathan James from the OECD. What are your thoughts on what schools can do to develop student participation and agency in order to build trust?
It's a really good question. I think I pick up on some of the things that, like, Lana gave a perfect example of why practicing democracy helps to build trust and build that sense of agency. And I really like what Lana said about the fact that it gives you a chance to see your voice being heard, but also to know that there's responsibility with that. And we in the Spotlight, we highlight 3 kind of areas that we see as being important to make student engagement practices meaningful. One is the scope of decision making. So I think Lana gave a really nice example, because I mean, sometimes, student councils might make decisions on things like school meals, but they're less likely to make decisions on things like teaching and learning, which is the core business of schools. So actually widening the scope of these activities, you're making decisions, or they're making decisions on things like mental health and well-being, like Lana gave an example of, and Nicole's example of policies on grading. We talked about inclusion a little bit as well, the need to make these more inclusive. One concrete thing that schools can do is, rather than having a student council where you're elected and you stay for the whole year, is rotating those positions so that the different people get to take on different roles at different times. And then another thing that I kind of touches on what Nicole said earlier is often the attitudes of adults for younger children. It's the attitudes of adults towards children's decision making that often make the difference. If adults believe that students are supposed to be passive recipients of decisions that are made in education institutions rather than active contributors, then there's a risk that these activities become tokenistic, and rather than building trust, so if students see that they're being consulted on things, it doesn't lead to any change, rather than building trust, that's actually going to destroy trust.
Thank you for that, and thank you for all the questions coming in. We are running very low on time though, so I want to get some final thoughts from our panel members. Given we seem to be living in this very argumentative world where we have social media echo chambers, where people seem to be more and more dismissive of each other's views, how confident are you that education can succeed in everything we're talking about here in terms of being able to build trust? How confident are you of education being able to succeed in this? Nicole Fournier-Sylvester, why don't we start with you on this?
I'm confident when I see like the number of people, for example, that are attending this webinar. I want to say that youth are not the issue. I don't believe that they're apathetic. I don't believe that they're disengaged. I believe that what we require is a culture shift within education systems that centers youth and centers practices that align with dialogue and civic engagement. And that to me is very clear. And just to sort of, if we don't feel that sense of urgency, I would like to give that sense of urgency briefly. I work in the prevention of radicalization space. And what I've learned is that if youth don't experience trust in schools, they will go online and they will find that sense of belonging, that sense of agency there. And there are people who are waiting for them there, who are building that sense of trust and agency and giving them a sense of community that is very problematic. And we have global rates of radicalization that are on the rise, and we need to be paying attention to that. And we need a culture shift within schools that centers agency, purpose, and belonging and the needs of our youth for today and tomorrow.
Thank you for that, Nicole, and really quite worrying what you're saying there. Let's bring in Katrin Finkenauer. Do you believe education can succeed in building trust, particularly given the dark consequences if we don't succeed?
I believe that it can, and especially because of what Lana said, because people who have few resources, who are stressed, who financial or through trauma or involuntarily displaced people have very little trust. But one of the biggest resources that we have, both in terms of teacher-student, but also student-student relationships, is social relationships. That's one of the biggest resource in human life, I think. And having resources also makes you more willing to use your voice and to build trust. And I think inclusive environments through all the means that we mentioned here provide a powerful opportunity to build trust, but also build social relationships that allow trust to emerge.
Thank you so much for that. Lana Parr from the European Students' Union, are you an optimist in this regard? And if there was one thing of all the different aspects which have been discussed in this webinar, is there something which you think should be prioritized to build trust?
I would say I'm an optimist because I choose to be the optimist, and I don't want to live in a world where this important role is taken and transferred from educational system to any other system. I think that's very dangerous, and I really believe that although it's a great responsibility, it is a responsibility also from the educational systems to work on building trust and encouraging dialogue and depolarizing the world that we're living in. So on that note, I would say that I am the optimist, and I would also agree with Nicole. There is a lot of talk about young people being apathic, and I don't agree with that. I think that they found different ways that they consider to be more meaningful to engage in their social lives. And of course, I believe that if more of them would vote or be more active when it comes to political life, maybe the situations would be better. I hope that soon that they will also come to their realization and that we can mobilize the rest of young people to go vote and also affect political changes in that
Okay.
way. But I would not agree that they're apathic. I really believe that they're very passionate and they care about the world that they're living it. So I choose to be an
Thanks.
optimist.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we are very short on time. So OECD's Jonathan James, very short final remarks from you.
So I think, I mean, we'll probably end with, it's great that we ended with Lana, because I feel like the generations that are coming up are the thing that give me optimism looking forward. So that's probably a nice note to end on.
Very nice note to end on. Well chosen. That is all we have time for, unfortunately. Please do check out the new OECD Education Spotlight report, The Common Thread Building Trust Through Education. It's coming out next Monday. Put the date in your diaries. You'll be able to find it on the OECD website, oecd.org. Thank you to all our panel today. Thank you for all your questions and for watching. And thank you to the team behind the scenes who've organised this webinar. Please do join us for another webinar soon. All the best.